Great. Well, thank you for joining the webinar today, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Sue Wilder. I'll be your host for the day. I'm a Corfa board member, and I have we have a few Corfa board members with us. I see Cheryl's on the call. Ken is probably with us. And we also have some friends from the Refuge Association. I see Jeff is with us today, and Marco and Courtney. We also have our Zoom magician who helps us with our technology, Eden. And so I'd like to welcome everybody today on behalf of Corfa and the Refuge Association. And again, if you would put your Refuge and your friends group name in there in the chat box, that would be great. So today we're going to hear from Andy Robinson, and I met Andy a number of years ago. He's a professional who is also an author on the management of nonprofits. And I think you will be so very pleased with his talk today. His topic is board recruitment, and I think you'll really learn a lot. I'm super excited about this talk. So I'll turn it over to you, Andy, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Sue. And I'm going to share in my screen and make sure everybody can see it. Excellent. So a couple of notes here. First of all, we're going to make this interactive. I have plenty to say on the subject, but I find me talking at you for an hour is not really very good teaching or training. So I'll be presenting some material. We'll be using the chat box throughout for any questions or comments. If you like what I'm saying and you want to put a thank you in there or an amen or whatever, you're welcome to do that. But also feel free to post questions. Cheryl's going to be keeping an eye on the chat box, and we'll be bringing them to my attention periodically. So I'm going to try and answer some questions as we go. In addition, I'll be hanging out at the end for Q&A. My goal is to be done by 3 p.m. East Coast time, but we have blocked out overtime as well. So if your questions don't all get answered in the allotted time, you'll have a chance afterward, and I'll do my best to stick around and answer those questions. Basic stuff. We're going to send you the slide deck. We are recording this, and we will send you the recording. We've also sent out some additional handouts. I think they went out in the last hour or so. We'll make sure everybody gets those to supplement the stuff that's in the slide deck. So we're going to do our best to support you with the necessary materials. Speaking as the author, you can share this stuff. That's the whole point. I am training you to train your board to do this work better. So as far as I'm concerned, anything that I'm sharing with you today is for you to use however you wish to use. Let me thank Eden for holding down the Zoom tech. Yay, Eden. Let me thank Cheryl and Sue for supporting me in terms of keeping track of chat and bringing their voices into this. And we are going to have a couple of breakouts before the afternoon is over, so I'll let you know that's coming. I'm Andy Robinson. I'm based in Vermont. I have worked all over North America. I believe I've worked in 47 US states and Canada. I write books. I do a lot of training. And since the pandemic came along, I believe this is webinar number 149 or 150 that I've done in the last 3 years. So this has become a primary piece of my business and my work. So I am curious as to why you're here today. So let me go back one here. This is a chance to use chat. What are you looking for? What do you want to learn? Are there specific questions about board engagement or board recruitment or board design that you would like me to try and address today? So feel free to use chat for that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead and show you where I'm going, and then I'll pause and we'll have a chance to see what's in chat. So we're going to talk about how organizations grow and change. There's a model called the 4 stages that I want to share with you. We're going to talk about job descriptions, why you need them. I feel like a board service is a job like any other job, and people need to know what's expected of them and also what support they're going to get to do their jobs well. We're going to talk about board design, how to design a board that meets the needs of your organization. We'll talk a little bit about orientation. We'll talk a little bit about how to have better board meetings. If we go off on tangents, I'm fine with that. as long as the tangents are, driven by you and your questions and your needs. So Cheryl, I want to bring you into this in terms of what people are looking for. What are you seeing in chat?
Okay, we've got looking for tips, directions on board member recruiting, anything to help recruit board members.
Yep.
Diversifying our board.
Yep.
Bigger board with many diverse skills. Board recruitment, retention and engagement. More diverse boards again. Trying to keep it from jumping here so I can read it. Our board lacks any diversity. We also have a very passive board. How to convince the public why a federal institution needs a professional board. Hoping to learn how to attract skilled board members that are really engaged, how to get the board to be self-directing, and keeping board members active.
Okay, these are all great. And I think we'll be able to cover a lot of that. So that's helpful too. I will also say the very last slide is my contact info. And if there's a question that you don't get answered today and you want to shoot me an email, I'll do my best to answer it. So you can probably have more than one bite at the apple. If you don't get today, feel free to reach out to me and I'll try and help you in the future. So where we start?
Andy, before you get started, a couple more came in that are a little bit different.
Sure.
My board likes helping out at the refuge, but few are comfortable doing fundraising where you have to ask people for money.
Yep.
And reinforcement of current positive practices and improvements on actions we can approve on, and using committees.
Okay, good.
That's the bottom of the line so far.
That's great. And sadly, that just turned into a 3-day webinar, but I'll do my best to, touch on at least a few of these. What you're looking at is a model called the 4 stages. I learned this from an organization called the Institute for Conservation Leadership, and they learned it from a guy named Carl Mathiasen, who's an organizational development guru. And it's this idea that organizations have lifespans and sort of stages in those lifespans. Most groups start out as all volunteer organizations, no staff, just volunteers. Everything that's done is done by volunteers. And there are certainly a number of friends organizations that exist in this space where they're not staffed. They're just volunteers. There's no one to assign work to except each other. And I want to give some love to these organizations because there are many, many all volunteer organizations that seem to fly below the radar, but they are literally the backbone of the nonprofit sector. Some of them are incorporated and have their 501c3 and all that, and some of them are informal. And that's lovely. Either way can work. What I would say the strengths at this stage is there's a lot of passion. People are in it because they love the mission of the organization, but the weaknesses are certainly manifold. You have often a lack of organization. There's not a lot of capacity because people are doing this as volunteers and they have jobs and families and other things. So sometimes they choose to go to the next stage, which we would call the leap. And the leap is where you hire your first staff, you get the website, business cards, you get the phone number, you start to professionalize, and you're thinking like, how do we have a bigger impact? Well, we need an employee for whom this is their day job. And the reason it's called the leap is it's kind of scary because all of a sudden you've got an employee, you have to make payroll, you need to have different systems in place. And sometimes groups leap and they don't actually get to the other side. Certainly an advantage of this stage is now it's somebody's day job and somebody can pay attention to the mission and do work that maybe volunteers can't get around to doing. And the weaknesses here include the fact that you have to make payroll, so you need to be bringing in a significant amount of money. And often there's this challenge of, are we good at supervising staff? Are the people who did everything in the past able to back up a little bit and not micromanage the person that they have hired? Now, sometimes organizations will get to the next stage, which is called shared leadership or shared governance. And this is a stage where you have board, you have staff, you have enough employees that maybe some people can specialize. You start to have systems in place. You got some structure. It's sort of a sweet spot. Beyond that, we have a stage called the institutional stage. And I think we all know that institutions are substantial, have been around for a while, they have resources, they have power. They can often have a large impact because they have all those resources. And there are also risks and challenges of being an institution as well. I put this up here because as we're talking about board design and building the board we need, a tendency I see consistently is that people are sort of designing their board and creating their board for the current circumstance as opposed to where they're going. And I would often ask my clients, I'd say, I want you to build the board that's going to get you to the place you're trying to be 3 to 5 years from now, as opposed to trying to backfill the holes that you have now. Because the purpose of a board is actually to provide that strategic direction and help you go to where you're going. So I will often ask organizations, who do you want to be when you grow up? And what's the right scale? What's the right size for your organization? And, looking at this chart, I don't want to say that all wisdom moves from the left to the right. I belong to an organization in Vermont that was an all-volunteer organization for about 75 years. And a decade ago, we hired our first staff. And we had staff for 3 years, and we decided we were happier as an all-volunteer organization, and we went back in the other direction. And we were there for a while. And in recent years, we've hired staff again, this time under a different job title, and we're actually in a good space. But sometimes groups choose to take a step backwards. And I don't think that's inherently good or bad. It can be the right move depending. But back to my original point, as you're building your board, I want you to build the board that's going to take you to where you're trying to go, as opposed to where you are now. So that moves us into a conversation about what I would call board design. And I want you to think about 3 different criteria. The first one is skills. Skills is what do board members know how to do. So do they know how to facilitate a meeting? Do they know how to raise money? Do they know how to be good ambassadors and outreach people in the community? Qualities are more subtle. Qualities are things like good listener, team player, creative minded, that sort of stuff. And then the third bucket here is representation. And several of you have already said today, you need your boards to be more diverse, which I hear and I respect. The way I would think about this is the board should represent the community you serve and also the community you aspire to serve. And so ideally, the people who benefit from your work, whatever that looks like, are the ones that need to be in leadership in your organization. So the classic tool that we use to help us think about this is called a board matrix. And sometimes you get these matrices or matrices that are standard, like it says banker, lawyer, accountant. And I sort of reject that because all organizations are different and what they need is different. So the way we would use this, and I'm going to give you a chance to work on this in a few minutes, is I would have you brainstorm the skills and qualities and representation that you want on your board that's specific to you. It's not generic, it's specific. And then you'll see I'm going to fill this in a minute, that you would use these criteria to then score the board members you have and start to figure out where the gaps are that you're trying to fill as you're recruiting board members. And you can really use this 3 different ways. It's okay to score or rate the group as a whole, which is lovely. You can also, per my previous comment, actually score board members individually. And this is a little tricky because you're passing judgment on people. Not everybody wants to do this. Or another way to use this model is for board self-evaluation, meaning you generate the skills, qualities, representation that you are trying to include on your board. And then each board member actually looks at the list and says, what do I bring? How am I doing against these criteria? And this can be a way for board members to either up their game and think, okay, there's some things here I need to do better. Or there may be folks who look at it and go, I'm not bringing a lot to this board. Maybe I'm not the best person to be on it. And if you have a problem with what is commonly called deadwood, meaning folks who are filling board seats but aren't doing much, this could be a tool or an opportunity to have that conversation in terms of what people are bringing to the board. Now, I will propose a very simple scoring system. Plus is outstanding. Great. We're doing really good against this criteria. Check mark is adequate. Good, good enough. Not great, but good. Minus is poor. We are not doing this well. Question mark is, I haven't thought about that. I don't really know. So if you were going to start to plug in this matrix, it would begin to look like this. Down the left side, I have included 5 different skills, qualities, representation. So I've got meeting facilitation, team player, available time, board experience, meaning experience on other boards, willingness to fundraise. And then what I've got across the top are initials for some random board members. This is all made up. It's not based on a real group. And then each one of them has been scored against these criteria. And if you do this, you're starting to get what a scientist would call a gap analysis. You're figuring out where the gaps are on your board so that you can consciously go and recruit people to fill those gaps. Now, I got to say the alternative, and we'll get into this later, the alternative is people pulling out their phones and like going like this and trying to find friends who might say yes, which gets you a random collection of board members. And this will work a lot better if you are intentional about it and you really try and figure out what you need to strengthen your work. So in a minute, we're going to send you into breakouts. Before we do, are there any questions or comments about what I've presented so far? And Cheryl, if you're seeing anything in chat, this is your moment.
Not anything new.
Okay, that's fine. So let's do this. Eden's going to do the magic Zoom thing in a minute, and we're going to drop you into breakouts. And you're going to be in a room with 2 or 3 other people. If you haven't done Zoom breakouts before, I imagine pretty much everybody has by now, but if not, you'll be invited to join a room. It'll say join room 6 or join room 12. And you'll click on the button and you're going to land in a space with 2 or 3 other faces. This is actually a great place to turn on your camera. You don't have to, but these breakouts work better if you can actually see each other. So we encourage you to do so. And you're going to have about 5 minutes to answer this question. So this is a brainstorm. And so you can think about skills, you can think about qualities, you can think about representation. Certainly you're brainstorming for your own organization. My sense is that most of what you're going to come up with is going to be relevant to everybody that you're talking to. So we'll give you roughly 5 minutes on this. If you run out of steam, keep going. Like, what else? What else do we want? Is there anything else we want? I'm guessing in 5 minutes, you can come up with at least a dozen or 15 or maybe 20 different skills, qualities, representation you would like on your board. We'll give you a 2-minute warning halfway through, and then we'll bring you back to the main room. And when we get back, I'll just show you the next slide here. We'll ask you to put in chat anything that you came up with in your group. So you can designate a note taker. I don't think you have to, but if you want to, that's fine. But we're going to collect it in chat, and we're actually going to save the chat log and send it out to everybody. So we have the benefit of all your excellent brainstorming that you can then bring back to your organizations. So Eden, I think we're ready to set up the breakouts. Can you do that? Yeah, here they come. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate having you back. Please mute if you would, that'll help us. And I'd love to hear what you talked about in your groups. So this is a chat opportunity. Go ahead and load up the chat box with any skills, qualities, and/or representation that would make your board stronger and more effective. And you're welcome to follow along as stuff gets dumped into chat. We don't have to read them all because there'll be a lot there. But it's nice to capture that because we can actually learn from each other. Some of the other groups may have come up with things that you didn't think of and vice versa. Maybe you came up with stuff that your colleagues didn't think of. So feel free to put them in there. Cheryl, I'm going to pick on you for a second. Are you there?
Okay, I'm
so
here.
A question, you don't have to read chat. I just want you to talk to me. If you were going to look for one quality in a board member, what would you put at the top of your list?
Passion for the refuge.
Yeah, it's a really
and not
good
just
answer.
the programs, not just the programs. It's easy to find people who love your programs and your projects.
Yep.
It's hard to find people who have the passion to do the less exciting things sometimes.
Nice. Sue, if you're out there, unmute and tell me one thing you would look for in a board member.
Yep. I'm out here. I would say time. I would like that they have time.
Good. Two excellent answers. Thank you both. All right. So again, feel free to keep loading stuff into chat here. My intention with this tool is that you use it in two ways. First of all, you want to do that gap analysis. You want to figure out where the gaps are. And secondly, you want to proactively recruit people to fill those gaps. The alternative is the I know a guy strategy, which gets you literally a randomly created group of board members, and that's not going to carry you as far forward as you'd like to go. So that's step one in this process, is to actually do some board design. Step two is to get a board description. And why you need this. First of all, clarifies expectations. Because I think if you're asking people to be on a board, they need to know what's expected of them. I find that it helps with recruitment. I think if you have a clear job description, people look at it and they think, you know what, this organization is structured and organized and thoughtful, and I want to be a part of that. I believe that a good job description is reciprocal. It's not only what you want from board members, but what they can expect in return. And I'll show you a sample of that in a minute. And the other advantage here is it weeds out people who can't actually meet your expectations. And if you are so desperate that you will accept anyone who says yes for being on your board, that's a problem. You really need to set some standards in terms of what you're looking for. So we have sent out a couple of samples, which you'll find in your email. You don't have to look at them now, but I want to share an excerpt of one of them. This is 2 columns on a page. One column is what board members provide, meaning what you want them to do. Second column is what they can expect in return. So running through this, it says on the left, I will give my best effort to hit the ground running. I'm going to show up. I'm going to start working. You got me. On the right, it says, I expect a full orientation and a board mentor. In other words, if you want me to start off, going from 0 to 60, you need to give me the tools and the training to do that. On the left, I will take my fiduciary responsibility seriously. So board members are fiduciaries. They need to understand the business model. They need to make sure the organization is financially sound. And on the right, it says, I expect to be trained to understand our financials. And it's one of those sort of dirty little secrets is most board members, if you give them a balance sheet, you give them a profit and loss statement, right? They don't know what they're looking at. Most people aren't trained to read that stuff. And so if we expect them to be fiduciaries, we actually have to train them to understand the financials and be able to make good decisions about them. On the left, I commit to being an informal ambassador. I think that's one of the jobs of board members, is to represent in the community. On the right, I will need training, support, and materials. If you want me to go out and talk to my friends about this, let's practice that. What do you have that I can share with people? On the left, as a donor, our group will be one of our top 3 charitable commitments. On the right, I will have filling my pledge in monthly payments. So we're going to talk a little bit about fundraising further in. I will say that I do expect all board members to be donors at whatever level is comfortable for them financially, because frankly, it's much easier to be involved in fundraising if you're a donor yourself. The karma is sort of inescapable in this stuff. So I am curious about what you might include in a board job description. And I'm going to give you an answer when we come back from breakouts, but there's always one thing that I want to see in a board description, job description, that I almost never see. So I will reveal that later, but I want to give you guys a chance to work this. So if you were building a job description for your board, what expectations would you put in there? And also, what would you offer board members to support their learning, to support their volunteerism, to help them be more effective? So we're going to do the breakouts a little differently this time. Rather than have you choose your group, you're going to be assigned to a group. I think we got it right now. And so all you have to do is to click on the button. You're going to drop into a group with about 3 or 4 other people. Again, we'll give you about 4 or 5 minutes to discuss this. And the topic is, I'll cue up the question here. If you were building a job description for your board, what would you include? And when we return, the report backs will be exactly the same. What did you include, so that we have a record of your brainstorming? So I think that's pretty straightforward. Eden, cue it up. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a productive conversation. As before, would love to get your responses in chat here. So go ahead and fill up the chat box. If you were building a board job description, what would you include? What would you expect from people? What would you provide for people? So feel free to add that. And an interesting conversation came up in the main room during break. Cheryl said that somebody put in chat that COVID had changed board expectations, and how do we adapt to that? And, Cheryl, since you brought it up, I'd love to get your voice in here. How do you think it's changed things, and how do you think we manage?
I don't know that I know how it's changed things. As I mentioned, several of our board members really, really wanted to go back to in-person meetings. We had our first in-person meeting last month.
Yep.
That's not my feeling. I think it's really efficient to have meetings on Zoom. So I guess that was why I was interested in that comment. What your observations have been?
Well, as I was telling you, I chair a board, and which is, some substantial amount of work. We have never even had a conversation yet about having board meetings in person again. People are really comfortable with Zoom. It's made it more accessible for some folks. I think we'd like to get together and socialize. I mean, I might host something at my house for the board to come over and hang out and just, be friends together. But Zoom has worked well for us. I don't know that it's changed the job of the board. I mean, we're still doing the same governance stuff. We're still answering the same. I will tell you that COVID forced us to do a whole different level of problem solving, because we have a facility and we had to figure out how to use the facility or not in the middle of a pandemic, and what the protocols were. And any organization that has a facility wrestled with that. So in that sense, our job description changed because we all became public health experts. So that was not what I had signed up for, but there it is. We dealt with it. So I hope the chat is good. Cheryl, if there's stuff coming in you want to share with me, this would be a moment to do it.
Okay, I'm just glancing through them right now.
Yep.
I was going to say that for most of us, we didn't have to make those public health decisions because they were made by Fish and Wildlife, whether we could use the buildings and so on.
Yeah. Well, and you are also gifted with the great outdoors, and
we are.
Right. It's where people, what happened, certainly I work with a lot of conservation land trusts. I'm sure this is true with the refuges, is at the peak of the pandemic, they were overwhelmed with visitors because everybody wanted to do stuff outdoors. And there were places where all the parking lots were full and all the trailheads were full, and you couldn't get to the place because of demand. So in that sense, it's good for business because it actually gets more people out on the properties. All right. So let me bring up the thing that nobody ever brings up. These days, when I am asked to be on a board, the first question I ask is, how much time do you expect? And I never get a straight answer. People say, well, we have a monthly meeting and it's an hour and a half. And I say, yeah, but that's not all you want me to do, right? Isn't there more work you want? Like, how are people spending their time on the board? And very few folks can answer this well. So what I've come to proposing is that we have time sheets for our board members. And I want you to do this as an experiment. I don't want you to put names on it. I want it to be anonymous because I don't want people to lie about their hours. But what I'm envisioning is a piece of paper that has 4 or 5 columns. Column says coming to board meetings. Another column says preparing for board meetings. Another column says committee work. Another column says being an ambassador in the community. Another column says fundraising, or whatever the tasks are that your board members help with. Maybe it's, volunteering on the refuge. And say to folks, I want you to track your hours for the next, let's say, 3 months. Again, be honest about this. It's anonymous. I don't want to know who you are. I just want to get the sheets. And then you compile it after 3 months and you have a snapshot. And then if somebody like me says, how much time does it take to be on your board? You can say, you know, we did a time study of our board, and here's what we discovered. At the low end, board members were putting in 5 hours a month. And at the high end, that would be the chair of the board, that person was putting in about 20 hours a month. And the median amount was about 7.5 hours. Again, I'm making up these numbers. Your numbers are going to be different. But I can say to somebody, on average, each board member is contributing about 1 day per month to be part of the board. And then, like, I'm thinking, good, you're organized. You've thought about this. So this is a proposal. If it feels good to you, try it. If it seems extraneous, don't bother. Next thing I want to talk about is board orientation. When new people come on board, we need to welcome them and greet them and get them engaged. And here's a random list. You don't have to do all of these things, but some portion of them would be helpful. The classic is the board manual, right? That's the 3-ring binder with the bylaws and the articles of incorporation and the newsletter and that stuff. And if you have a board job description, it would totally show up in there. It's a helpful thing. I think people tend to do the manual and assume that that's the orientation, and I don't believe that's true. Some groups have an orientation event where they're bringing on a new class of board members, a new cohort, and maybe they give them a tour of the facility, they take them out on the refuge, talk with them about expectations, answer their questions, feed them some food. So that might be an hour and a half or something like that, but that's a nice ritual that also includes some real useful information. I'm a believer of the buddy system. I think a classic thing you do is you pair up a continuing board member with a new board member who can answer their questions and talk to them on the side and address any concerns they have. Because sometimes you show up on a new board and there's all this subtext. And like there are some people who aren't looking at other people, or maybe there's some conflict, or maybe there's some conversations that are happening in the parking lot that aren't actually happening in the meeting. And it's pretty nice if you're a new board member to have somebody unpack that for you and tell you what's going on. Another option, and some of you already do this informally, is what I would call the day in the office, meaning you show up, and if you have staff, I realize not all of you do, you actually shadow the staff and see what they do. You know, so if you have someone who's doing management, and I realize that this may be an employee of the Park Service as opposed to an employee of your nonprofit organization, and you have to negotiate that, you sort of have to figure out what they do. Because it's nice if you're a board member to have a sense of what the workflow is within the organization. And then a classic thing is a board retreat. And board retreat is you all gather somewhere, probably off-site, though it doesn't have to be off-site, for a half a day or a full day. Maybe this is once a year. And you're talking about perhaps strategic planning, or perhaps you're getting a fundraising training, or perhaps you're talking about that job description and trying to nail that so you're all clear about what that is. Because sometimes there are topics or subjects we can't cover during a regular board meeting that need to be addressed. So again, you don't have to do all of these things, but some combination would be useful. Which gets me to my last topic of this afternoon, which is board meetings. I am bringing a very strong bias to this conversation. I believe the purpose of meetings is to make decisions. If all you're doing is presenting information and doing reports, there are so many other ways to present information now that to physically gather people to read them reports or tell them what you're doing seems like a not great use of people's time. So I have come to the point, and again, I'm speaking as both a facilitator, trainer, and also a board chair, that I'm working off the following format. And we sent these out as Word documents. You should have them with your materials. There's 7 columns on this agenda. The first column is time, when stuff starts. Second column is topic, what are we going to talk about? Third column is who. And I would argue that the who can be different people and should be different people. Talk more about that in a minute. The middle column is the decision to be made. And let me be clear that not every board agenda item has to have a decision attached to it. I get that. But if I'm building an entire agenda and there's no decisions involved at all during that meeting, I start to question the value of meeting. The fifth column is what follow-up do we need after the decision is made? followed by who will do this follow-up and by when, what is the deadline? So I think it should be obvious that some of this can't be filled out in advance of the meeting. You actually fill it out during the meeting as you're having the conversation. So here's a sample page, and this is spread over 2 slides. We start with a welcome, that's Nancy. Then we have what we call a mission moment from Carlos. That could be, in this case, a slideshow about the stewardship program. The idea of the mission moment, this comes from a consultant called Kay Sprinkle Grace. And Kay believes that board members need to be reminded why they're on a board. Like, it's not necessarily about the spreadsheets or about the governance, it's the mission. So you want to have something at every board meeting that actually engages people's hearts and reminds them why they're involved in the first place. So then we have the updates on the individual fundraising activities. Please notice we're 20 or 30 minutes into this and we haven't made decisions yet. I'm okay with that. This gets us to the meat of the agenda. 7:30 presentation of the draft fundraising plan. Rod and Wanda are doing this. The decisions is, do we have the right goals? Is the business model correct? How are we feeling about the fundraising plan and what's in it? And with a follow-up is we're going to update the goals. Rod and Wanda will do that. And hopefully we have a final plan by the next board meeting in November. Followed by, we have been asked to sign off on an open space bond issue for our city. There's a city council meeting coming up. Are we going to get involved? Do we sign on? How much resources can we apply to this? Followed by, we better then tell our coalition partners what we have planned to do and if we're participating and how much we can offer to help the coalition. So these are 2 pretty juicy topics that will require some thinking and some discussion and maybe some argument. Now, I want to point out, I'm going to do some counting here. If you look at this agenda as a whole, there are, I believe, 5 or 6 people who are leading different parts of the agenda. We have Nancy, we have Carlos, we have Rod, we have Wanda, we have Bettina. So that's 5 different people. And the intention here is, I want to spread responsibility and leadership across the board. This is sort of a lateral leadership model where everybody has a piece of that. I feel like facilitating parts of a meeting is a leadership skill. People should learn how to do it. But also, you got to believe that everybody who's on this agenda and they know in advance they're leading a part of the discussion, they're going to show up. They're going to show up prepared. They're going to put some forethought into it. And you're going to have a better result because people actually showed up prepared for this. So if I'm the chair, I'm going to start assigning stuff out a week or a month in advance, saying, okay, who's going to lead this? I think Sally would be the best person to lead this discussion. I'm going to contact her and say, are you prepared to do this? Would you help me with this? So I'm really trying to spread power across the board. And one way to do it is to divide up the agenda. So that's as much as I wanted to cover here today. Let me go back to the screen, excuse me. And we're going to open it up for questions. So the best way to do it is to put your questions in chat. However, if you want to unmute, we can even manage that. All right, here's the question slide. And I will actually make this go away in a minute here. And Cheryl, I'm relying on you to feed questions to me.
Okay, we don't have any questions yet. So I'm watching for hands to go up. Does everybody know how to use the raise hand?
The raise hand is good too. Or you could just do this and we'll try our best to see you.
That's right. Just raise your hand. We'll try to catch you.
Yeah, it's analog, but it works.
Andy, I was going to make a comment on your agenda. I've used a form very similar to that to also take minutes.
Yep.
Because then all you have to do is look down the who's in charge list to know exactly what you have to do before the next meeting or whatever.
Okay. So there's a question here about diversity because it came up in your comments and I haven't addressed it directly. So let me just go there. And thank you for raising it. I'm forgetting who raised it now, but thank you. When I talked about earlier is the idea that the board should represent the community you serve. And maybe even the community you aspire to serve. And usually I'm going to, we're talking about diversity. I'm going to click off all the dimensions I can think of. We're talking about age. We're talking about social class. We're talking about race. We're talking about gender identity. We're talking about sexual orientation. We're talking about geography. We're talking about ability and disability. We may be talking about political diversity. And it wouldn't hurt, as you're building that matrix that we were working on earlier, to put those things in there. The challenge, and this is where I get uncomfortable, is that it can really lead to tokenism very fast. And you say, okay, we're going to find an African American woman who's under the age of 25, who's in a wheelchair, and then we go check, check, check. That's 3 things. And that poor woman is isolated on an island on that board. So if we want to have a more diverse board, and this is really the work of another webinar and a deeper conversation, it probably involves thinking about the culture of your organization, the culture of your work. Are you welcoming? Are you accepting? And, here's a classic example. Imagine that you decide to do your board meetings on Wednesday afternoons because everybody's retired and that's when they can come out and drive. Well, you've exempted everyone who has a day job. And you've exempted a lot of people who have children and need to do childcare. And so, it wouldn't hurt for you if, for example, if you're trying to get younger people on your board, to actually create a childcare opportunity for people where they can come and they can bring their kids, and you as the organization are paying for someone to do childcare while the board meeting is happening. There may be folks who need transportation. Are you prepared to provide that? So I think, and again, this is something deeper than I can touch because I don't want to create like a little checklist and we end up with a token bunch of board members, is to have a deeper conversation. Is what is the culture of our organization? What is the culture of a board? How do we make it more welcoming for people who are different than the people who are currently sitting around this table? And I'll give a note to folks who are sponsoring this, is I can recommend folks, but I think that's enough work to cover 2 or 3 other webinars. So I'm happy to put it on the table. It's not something we can answer in 3 minutes. What else is in the question box?
I'm not seeing anything new.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, while you're thinking about it, I did see a hand go up at one point, so you can raise your hand again. While you're thinking about it, I'm going to put the screen up again. So bear with me while I do this, because I want to pose one more question for you guys. Lovely. I am curious as to what you're going to do with what you learned today. And, you invested an hour of your time learning about this stuff. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I want to know how you're going to implement it. And so this is a chance for you to sit, think for a second. And if you're willing to put it in chat and share it with the world, I think it's inspiring for everyone else to see what everybody else is planning to do on implementation. It's also helpful for me. This is a kind of market research for me, because if I know you're walking out of here with a next step or a to-do list or a beginning of a plan, then I know the webinar was useful. So I'd love for you to think about something that we talked about today that's triggered in you. Okay, here's a next step for me, or here's something I need to do. Go ahead and put that in chat.
We have one that says make job descriptions, Andy.
Yeah, good idea. While you're doing that, I'm an author of many books. I'm going to plug one of them. It's called What Every Board Member Needs to Know, Do, and Avoid. And it covers some of the content that we talked about in the webinar today, plus some other stuff. So that book is available on the website there. And again, you'll see this, you'll get the slide decks. You'll have a chance to order that way if you're interested. And then my contact info is here. I'm at Andy Robinson online, and I'm also at trainyourboard.com. And if you have follow-up questions, let me know. If there's an opportunity for me to help train your board, that's a possibility. So stay in touch and let me know how I can be helpful. Cheryl, are there other questions?
Yes, several people are talking about sharing the information that you provided with their board, with other members of their board, with their executive director. There are several comments about that. One says having program meetings for members and the public, and not always at the refuge. And I like the idea of the board agenda led by various board members. Thank you. Lots of excellent and concrete ideas.
Thank you. Thank you. So if anyone here wants to, again, raise your hand and unmute and ask a verbal question, as opposed to putting it in chat, this would be the moment to do it. So feel free to raise your physical hand, raise your virtual hand, or you can even just start talking and see what happens.
Here's
I
another
see a
comment
hand.
from the
Who is
chat.
it? Willem. Willem, you're up. Unmute.
Thank you. I'm unmuted. One issue we have is capacity. We have a working board, about at the moment, I think 11 board members, but there is more work than we can do as 11 board members. We haven't found a good way to involve the rest of our membership actively in that type of activities what the board does. We can get them to plant and do all kinds of other things related to restoration or environmental education, but get them involved, for example, to offload their executive director as far as administrative tasks, helping out the treasurer and things like that. We haven't found a way for that yet. Any suggestions?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the administrative grunt work tends to be the hardest thing to find volunteers to do. So first of all, you need to know it's not about your organization. These are just hard tasks to fill. One thing you might do is go to local businesses. I don't know where you're located, but sometimes local businesses have employee volunteer programs where people get comp time or they get supported in being volunteers at local nonprofits. And for example, if you need some accounting help or some administrative help, maybe it is possible to find a volunteer pool that would come from local businesses who would loan you some of their appropriate staff to do that. That's one idea. The other idea is to just break it down to the task level and try and keep it simple. I need somebody to come into the office for 1 hour on a Thursday to stuff envelopes. And it's not a permanent commitment, it's a one-off. And see if you can get somebody to do that. And then if they agree to that and they're good, you say, can we recruit you for something else? Are you available? The last note I'll say, and then Bob, you're going to be up next, is your experience recruiting volunteers lives or dies on how well they're treated. So if you bring in volunteers, this is like a whole nother workshop that perhaps I'll give for you one day. But if you're going to bring in volunteers, you have to be organized. The tasks that they're doing have to be at least somewhat interesting. You need to be appreciative. It doesn't hurt to feed them and make them feel welcome. Because if people show up and they have a disorganized or unsatisfying volunteer experience, they're not going to come back. So the message here is that volunteers are not free labor. They need to be recruited. They need to be supervised. They need to be managed. They need to be loved. And you really need, it's a conundrum, but you need some capacity to have volunteers that you may or may not have. All right, Bob, you're next.
Hi, yeah, again, I know you said it would require another webinar or 3, but still, just if you would have any recommendations on how to do research, to outreach, to do, to get more diversity in our group. Because as far as most of the people are concerned, we're very welcoming, we're very friendly to anyone who comes, but that really is not addressing the issue at all as to why we can't, attract any kind of diversity. So just any ideas you would have on what kind of outreach we can do? Well,
what some organizations will do is they'll create sort of a board auxiliary. Where I've seen this most usefully is trying to get younger people involved. So they might have a youth auxiliary, and these folks are not full-on board members, but they're treated as an advisory board. And, another way to think about this is, I don't know what kind of committees you have, Bob, but the classic model is the committees are include of both board members and also non-board members. And you recruit people to come onto the committee, give them some work to do, see how they do, see if they like you and you like them. And then over time, you can sort of move them up to the next level, which is the board. So this is the baseball metaphor. You're going to play a AA or AAA before you play in the major leagues. And a committee structure might be useful for doing that. Another thing you could do is a focus group. You know, for example, if you're trying to get more people of color on your board, or you're trying to get more women on your board, or you're trying to get younger people on your board, or whatever the appropriate demographic group is, sit them, you know, invite them to something for an hour, bring out some food, put them in a circle. Maybe there's a facilitator and you do a focus group. And the focus group is, we are trying to diversify our board. We're trying to get a more broader mix of people involved. What advice do you have for us? And, you know, ask the people you are trying to recruit what they need to be recruited successfully. And, you know, I mean, I think that is going to get you further than anything else, is go to the people you're trying to ask and say, how do we invite you better? And what do you need from this? And again, people may bring up barriers. This is awkward for a nonprofit, but I will name it. The small city near where I live has a whole lot of community committees. There's like committees for everything. There's 20-some committees in a city of 8,000 people. A lot of community involvement. And what they have decided to do as a municipality is they offer $50 stipends for anyone who comes to, you know, people who serve on committee and need that as part of coming to the meeting. So that might pay for transportation, that might pay for childcare. If somebody is missing work, that will cover some of their time that they're not getting paid. And so they're basically saying, and something like 8% of the people who serve on committees have taken the stipend. It's not like everybody's doing it. But for some people, that $50 makes a difference, and it enables them to participate. Because the biggest barrier, I mean, this is a rant, and I'll try and keep it short, but this whole 501c3 model that we live under is a legacy that was built 100 years ago. And it was built at a time when one person could go to work and make enough money to feed a family. And it was built at a time when it was assumed that men would work and women would stay home and care for children. And it was built at a time when the economy was very, very, very different. And I think the biggest problem we have is that people don't have time to volunteer. And people who have less resources, less money, less time, less power, have even less time to volunteer. And so what we end up with on our boards tends to be people who have more money or more time. And that's a smaller slice of the population. And so this is a big demographic challenge that we are facing. I think the model is broken. I think we need some different models. But it's the model we're forced to operate under for the time being, and we just have to do better with it. But short answer is, ask the people who are not saying yes why they're saying it, not saying yes, and how you can change the way you ask or what you offer to make it easier for them to say yes. That's really long-winded. I apologize.
Andy, there's a question in the chat.
Willem, I'll get to you in a minute. Cheryl, what do you got?
Short of cleaning out the Deadwood board members, Deadwood in quotation marks,
yes,
do you have an idea to inspire them to do work?
Nice question. Okay, so I would give you like the carrot and the stick in this answer. The carrot is, I think, if you're the board chair, I don't know how many chairs I have on the call. I feel like it's your job, and I'm speaking to myself here, once a year to sit down with every board member, either in person or on the phone or on Zoom, and say, how's this working for you? What do you need? What are you getting out of being on the board? How can we engage you better? Do you have more time? Are there things you'd like to learn that you're not learning? Like, how is this going for you? And I think part of it is just having one-on-one conversations. I mean, I learned a term for this. It's called walking the board. And it basically means talking to each board member one at a time to find out what's going on and what they need. And I feel like that conversation, if it's done authentically and with, you know, generosity and love, is some of the people who are Deadwoodish will say, you know, I want to recommit, I want to do more. But it's also a chance to have the conversation about, is this working for you? Maybe it's time for you to be on a different board or take a different role within the organization. So that's the carrot part. There could be a stick part. And the stick might be, and I didn't present this today, but I'll try and send it to Eden to send to everybody. One way to think about the board job description is there's a bit of a checklist for people to do stuff. And everybody has to do a checklist. Like, here are 15 tasks that board members need to be done by the board. Everybody check 3 tasks. that you're willing to do. And the stick part, which is also sort of a carrot, is maybe there's a donor who says, I'll make up a number here, I'm going to give the organization $5,000 on the condition that every board member fill out that checklist, and that every quarter you have time at a board meeting where you go around the table and every board member has to say what they have done on their checklist to follow through on the commitment they made. So you start to build some accountability into the system. And if you know at a board meeting that you're going to be going around the table and everybody's going to be self-reporting on what they've been doing or not doing, people are more likely to do stuff. So then when it's their turn to speak, they actually have something to say. As opposed to, well, you know, last 3 months I've been a slacker. I haven't done anything. I feel bad about it. So this is not foolproof. But what's nice is if people see that other people are doing stuff, they're more likely to do stuff themselves because A, they're inspired, but B, they also feel a little bit of peer pressure. So none of these is perfect, right? But it's the best I got right now. Willem, you got something you wanted to add?
Yeah, that was on the previous topic where you suggested to make some money available for transportation or things like that. Now, the reality, of course, is at least for friends organizations, most of the money which comes in is restricted money. They're restricted to particular projects.
Right.
It's hard to get non-restricted money. On top of that, Fish and Wildlife also imposes what we can do with money in many cases.
Right.
And thirdly, the IRS is also a pain because they say as soon as you start giving money to a volunteer, it's no longer a volunteer. But it's,
yeah, all of your points are legitimate, and I want to point out that the example I gave you was a municipal government, not a nonprofit, for all the reasons you just said. And the point is still the point, which is we have to figure out a way to make board service more accessible for people. And so, for example, if we're not paying them, but they need childcare, we can pay for the childcare, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they need transportation, maybe we find a volunteer to pick them up and take them home. So we sort of have to lean into what are the barriers that are preventing people from serving, and then how do we address those barriers? And if money is not an option for the reasons you said, and you're raising legitimate points, then we have to find other solutions that don't involve money.
I agree.
All right. Anybody else? Cheryl, is there anything else queued up?
Lots of good comments. I hope everyone takes an opportunity to read the chat when the recording and the information comes out, because there are really good comments in the chat box.
Yeah, and the whole point here is we're crowdsourcing all the wisdom. I am one of the people that has wisdom on this, but I'm not the only one, and the rest are in the room. So I hope you'll learn from each other and read what you put in there. Tom, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Andy. I apologize in advance by saying that I came to the call late, and I don't know if you covered this issue already, but I'm interested in specifically how to recruit board members to be officers. In my group, which is the Ottawa Friends of Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge in Ohio, we have 4 officers: president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and they each have 2-year terms. And we can stay on the board for 6 years before we have to sit out for a year before getting back on the board. So yeah, the officers will term out after 2 years. And for instance, at the end of this calendar year, our president and vice president are going to term out. And the conundrum facing our governance committee is what to do about that. And we're going through this game right now, this brainstorming session right now on how to approach that. What we don't want to do is come to the end of the year where we don't have a candidate pool for officer for vice president and president, and at the end of the year we're faced with sitting around in a circle saying, well, so and so, do you want to be president this year? And things like that. So what comment do you and others have on that?
First of all, everybody's welcome to put their stuff in chat. When is the deadline, Tom?
End of the year.
End of the calendar year?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got 10 months to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Well, I'll give you the easy answer, which is, are there other board members who have the time and the inclination to step up and take those positions? So that's job one, is you look around the board and say, who's going to be the next president? And we need to acknowledge that everyone's going to do the job differently. I am currently a board president. I am doing it differently from my predecessor, who did an excellent job, but my approach to it is different, and I'm doing a good job. And I'm assuming whoever follows me will do it differently and will also do a good job. So, you know, point number one is, let's not try and recreate the next person in our own image. Second point is, what you might do is write up a job description for these officers. I don't know if you have a written job description that says what the president's expectations are. I mean, I have to figure out my successor. And what I've been asked to do by the board, because we don't have it written down, is to write down the job description. And as I'm doing it, I'm realizing there's more stuff that I'm doing that other people could do, that we could actually make this job easier than I have made it, which will make it easier to recruit somebody. You know, the third thing I would say is look outside the box a little. Like what we're talking about on our board is maybe we need co-presidents to spread the work around. And that would require changing the bylaws, which we could do. But maybe you allocate the work differently if no one is prepared to do it under the current setup. Last and final point is, maybe you got 10 months here. If no one in the current board is willing and able to follow you as president, then maybe you have to look outside the board and try and, I don't know if you have any open slots, but maybe you bring somebody in now and you, with the intention of training them into that position over the next 10 months. And look outside the board and say, okay, no one on this circle wants this job. We have to find somebody outside the circle who will take it, and we can train. You know, in principle, if it takes a couple of months to do that, you would still have 8 or 9 months in which to train them into the position, which is plenty of time.
Tell me, Andy, when you say find someone outside the circle, do you mean somebody who's not currently on the board?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the conversation I'm having on my board right now, because I'm not convinced there's anybody who's on the board who wants to follow me into this job. So I'm throwing it to the board and saying, okay, if none of you are available, let's think of who our members are, who are committed and active, involved with the organization, not on the board yet, but have some leadership skills that maybe we could bring in to be the future president. Now, you know, the last thing, I could do this all afternoon. The last thing I would say is, in many organizations, the assumption is whoever is the vice president then becomes the president, which isn't necessarily true, but maybe that should be part of your bylaws and or your expectations, that you actually build that pipeline in a continuous way. And so that anyone who signs up for vice president knows they're going to do it for 2 years, and then they're going to be president for 2 years, and that's how this works. And it's maybe too late in your case, but it's something for everybody else to think about. And I feel for you, bro, because I'm having the same problem.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Yeah, I am sitting in the same seat you are sitting in. And I will also say my solution, for a variety of reasons I won't go into, is I'm going to extend my presidency for a year. To buy myself more time to replace, and I'm not thrilled about it, but it's the best option.
Andy, do your bylaws permit you to do that?
Yeah, we don't have term limits.
Good for you.
Well, I like term limits. I'm totally in favor, but I'm only 2.5 years into this, and I'm already like at my limit. I was hoping to get out after 3 years, but I think it's going to be 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andy, several people have suggested, and this is a model we used to use, but didn't find successful. Others have said it is, having a president-elect, a president, and a past president. So you actually have a team of 3 people. The president-elect learning what's necessary to become president, not necessarily learning how to do it the way the current president does it, but what needs to be handled. The past president taking on special projects that might come up, that might be strategic planning or a fundraising project or whatever, and then the president running the meetings, basically.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to that. Current board I'm on, we do not have a president-elect, but we do have a past president. In the bylaws, the past president remains on the board, and she is a great asset to me. She's one of my best sounding boards is the past president. But, you know, sadly, as I said, I sort of like the model, and I can see how it could fail because you're trying to fill 3 slots at once. But
That was not the key problem for us. And I want to just throw this out because it may be for other friends groups. We have such a close working relationship with our refuge staff that they got frustrated with just getting accustomed to working with one president, and that one was gone and they had a new one in. So basically each person was only serving 1 year as president, the way we had it set up. And that didn't work well.
That's too quick. Yeah, I think you need at least a minimum of 2 years in each position. So, that's somebody making a 6-year commitment, and maybe that's overkill. I don't know. But yeah, I don't think you can turn over a board president every year. That strikes me as really challenging.
Yep. We found that out the hard way.
Yeah. All right. So Tom, I'm going to have you put down your hand since we've done our best to answer your question.
Right.
Cheryl, anything else in chat?
Again, lots of good comments. One was a suggestion based on walking the board.
Yeah.
Nat says that he tries to meet with one board member for coffee each month, more or less.
It's great.
And that's been really well received.
Brilliant.
And that seems like a great idea.
It's a really good solution because you're spreading it out throughout the year.
Yep.
Yeah, I like it. Thank you. Good plan. All right. So let me do all the thank yous. Let me thank Corfa for inviting me. And I trust you are all members of Corfa, but if not, you should be. Let me thank the Refuge Association for hosting and promoting, and Eden for holding down the Zoom space. Appreciate you. I know some of the other staff came, Marco's here and others, so thank you for showing up and representing. Cheryl and Sue, always appreciate working with you, and Joan Patterson, wherever you are, shout out to you. And I am happy to join you in the future if I can be of service. You'll get my contact info when you get the slide deck. If somebody needs me, reach out. I'll see if I can be helpful. And let me thank all of you for the work you're doing on the land, in your home places, caring for the places that need you. I know that the refuges would be far less successful without the support of the volunteers and the people you bring in. So I'm going to honor your work as well. And I hope everybody has a good afternoon. Sue, are there any other announcements?
Yeah, we just want to let everybody know that we'll have a March webinar on risk management. So look out for the announcement for that. And if you are following the sharing sessions, we're going to have a March meeting to summarize all the sharing sessions that we had the past month. So we will be in touch. And thanks everybody for coming. We have absolutely loved this talk, Andy. We can't thank you enough. It was fabulous. And we should be able to get the products out to you in the next day or two, I believe. So thank you all and have a great day. We will re-meet next month. Thank you.
And also just quickly, remember that the webinars are all posted on the Corfa website, the resource center. So if you think of something, 6 months from now that you want to look back at, go look at the website. The resource center will have the webinar.
Perfect.
Thank you all.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.